The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched across nearly a mile of polished metal and glowing crystal. Hundreds of species sat in their designated sections, their bodies ranging from towering rock-like beings to small floating clouds of gas. Light filtered through massive windows that showed the stars beyond, reminder of the vast galaxy they all shared. Ambassador Zethral moved to the central platform. His body was made entirely of living crystal, blue and purple light pulsing through his form with each word he spoke. He represented the Vorix Collective, one of the oldest civilizations in known space. When he spoke, others usually listened. "The Devourer fleet has been confirmed," Zethral announced. His voice echoed through translation devices, reaching every delegate in their own language. 47 warships of the largest class. They emerged from the dead zone 3 cycles ago and are moving toward populated space. Murmurs spread through the chamber. The Devourers were not a species anyone wanted to discuss. They had no homeworld that anyone knew of. They had no diplomats. They simply appeared, consumed everything in their path, and moved on. Entire civilizations had fallen to their fleets over the centuries. Their current path will take them through 17 colony worlds, Zethral continued. Estimated civilian population in their trajectory, 400 million souls. The murmurs grew louder. 400 million was a number too large to truly understand. It represented cities, families, children, futures. All of it would be gone if the Devourers reached those worlds. "We require immediate action," Zethral said. "Full mobilization of all member fleets. Coordinated response. We have 14 rotations before the first colony falls." In the corner of the human section, Lisa Monroe leaned back in her chair and watched the reactions around the chamber. She was 43 years old, with short gray-streaked hair and the kind of tired eyes that came from many years of watching politicians argue while people suffered. She had served as humanity's ambassador to the Council for 3 years now. In that time, she had learned to predict exactly how these meetings would go. The Cathari delegation spoke first. Their speaker was a tall insectoid being with 4 arms and compound eyes that glittered in the chamber lights. "The Cathari hegemony will require compensation guarantees before committing our vessels. Our fleet budget for this cycle has already been allocated." Lisa suppressed a sigh. There it was. The first delay. The Solvorian High Speaker rose next. Solvorians looked like walking trees, their bark-like skin shifting colors with their emotions. The Solvorian Republic questions the command structure of any joint operation. "Our admirals will not serve under Vorix authority." "The Nexu Consortium agrees with the Solvorians," another voice called out. "Furthermore, we require profit-sharing agreements for any salvage recovered from enemy vessels." Lisa turned to Danny Ortega, who sat beside her taking notes on a small tablet. Danny was younger than her, barely 30, with dark hair and a constant expression of mild disbelief at everything the Council did. 6 hours, Danny muttered. "We've been at this for 6 hours." Lisa nodded. She remembered her first Council meeting. How shocked she had been at the inefficiency. Species that could travel between stars, that had solved problems humanity was still struggling with, reduced to petty arguments over money and pride. She had thought it would get better as she learned the system. It never did. The debate continued. The Kethri demanded specific payment terms. The Solvorians argued that their military doctrine was superior and should lead any operation. The Nexu Consortium calculated potential profits from the conflict and found them insufficient. No one talked about the 400 million people who would die. Lisa watched the clock on her tablet. 7 hours now. The Devourer fleet was getting closer with every wasted minute. Somewhere out there, 17 worlds were watching the stars and waiting for help that might never come. High Arbiter Nick Sethan, the eldest member of the Council, tried to restore order. He was ancient, even by galactic standards, his bioluminescent body dimmed with age but still commanding respect. "Perhaps we could establish a preliminary committee to examine response options," he suggested. A committee. Lisa almost laughed. In Council terms, a committee meant months of additional discussion before any action was taken. By then, those 17 worlds would be Ash. The Solvorian. High Speaker droned on about territorial boundaries and historical precedents. His voice was like wind through dead leaves, rustling and endless. Lisa had heard speeches like this 100 times before. Words without meaning. Noise without purpose. She stood up. The chamber fell silent immediately. There was something about humans that other species found unsettling. Perhaps it was their eyes, forward-facing like predators. Perhaps it was their stillness, the way they could wait for hours and then move with sudden violence. Perhaps it was simply that humans were still new to the galaxy, unknown and unpredictable. "How long until the Devourer fleet reaches the first colony?" Lisa asked. Her voice was calm, almost soft. Zethral's crystal form pulsed with surprise. 14 standard rotations. "And how long have we been debating here?" 7 hours, by human measurement. Lisa looked around the chamber slowly. She met the compound eyes of the Cathari speaker. She watched the Silvorian High Speaker's bark shift to an uncomfortable gray. She saw the Nexu representatives suddenly find their data screens very interesting. 400 million people, Lisa said. 14 days. "And you want to form a committee?" No one answered. Lisa felt something shift inside her. It was a feeling she had experienced before years ago when she had served in Earth's humanitarian corps. The feeling of watching systems fail while people suffered. The feeling of knowing that if you waited for permission, for consensus, for everyone to agree, innocent lives would be lost. "Fine," she said. The word came out flat and tired. "I'll handle it." She walked toward the exit without looking back. Danny scrambled to follow her, already sending encrypted messages from his tablet. Behind them, the chamber erupted into confused chatter. Delegates turned to each other with expressions of bewilderment. What did the human mean? Handle what? With what resources? Humanity's fleet was tiny compared to the combined might of the Council. High Arbiter Nexithan raised a tendril for silence. But the chamber ignored him. Everyone was talking at once, trying to understand what had just happened. The Cathari speaker clicked his mandibles nervously. Should we be concerned? Nexithan did not answer immediately. He was old enough to remember the last time a species had walked out of a council session with those words. It had been the Vorix 3,000 years ago, and the resulting conflict had reshaped the entire galactic order. But the Vorix were ancient and powerful. Humanity was young, barely a century into interstellar travel. What could they possibly do? A young Solvorian delegate leaned toward Nexithan. "What just happened, High Arbiter?" Nexithan watched the doors through which the humans had disappeared. For the first time in 400 years, he felt something cold move through his ancient body. Something like fear. "I believe," he said slowly, "that we have made a terrible mistake." The chamber continued to buzz with speculation and argument. No one noticed that the human seats remained empty. No one thought to follow the two small figures walking through the station corridors toward the human docking bay. And no one saw the messages already spreading through human space. Faster than light, carrying for simple words that would change everything, Lisa looked out the viewport at the stars as their shuttle detached from the station. Danny was still sending messages, his fingers flying across his tablet. "How long until we reach Earth?" She asked. 6 hours if we push the engines." Lisa nodded. "Push them." Behind them, the Galactic Council continued its debate, unaware that the conversation had already moved past them. Unaware that 14 days from now, the galaxy would never be the same. The message reached Earth in 4 hours. By the 5th hour, President Carlos Vega was standing before an emergency session of the United Nations. The Great Hall was full. Every seat taken by representatives from every nation on Earth. In every human colony across the stars, Carlos was a tall man with a weathered face and steady hands. He had served in the military for 20 years before entering politics, and he understood what he was about to ask of his people. "The Galactic Council has refused to act," he said. His voice carried across the silent hall. 17 colony worlds faced destruction. 400 million innocent lives hang in the balance. And our so-called allies have chosen to debate payment terms while the clock runs down. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. 3 hours ago, Ambassador Monroe informed the Council that humanity would handle the situation ourselves. I am here to make that official. Effective immediately, I am authorizing Operation Quiet Fury. The hall erupted into noise. Some delegates shouted questions. Others demanded clarifications. But most simply sat in stunned silence, understanding what this meant. Carlos raised his hand for quiet. This is not a declaration of war. This is a rescue mission. We will not wait for the galaxy to find its courage. We will not stand by while millions die. We will do what needs to be done, because no one else will. Across human space, the word spread like fire. In orbital shipyards, vessels that had been sleeping for decades powered up their engines. On colony worlds, reserve officers reported for duty. In living rooms and workplaces, ordinary people watched the president's speech and made decisions that would change their lives. Admiral Sophie Grant stood on the bridge of the carrier Resolute, the largest warship humanity had ever built. She was 52 years old, with silver hair cut short and eyes that had seen too many battles. Her crew moved around her with practiced efficiency, preparing for what everyone knew was coming. Status report, Sophie said. Her first officer, Commander Kevin Park, checked his displays. We have 300 vessels confirmed en route, Admiral. Another 200 expected within the next 6 hours. That's almost our entire active fleet. What about the reserves? Waking up as we speak. The old battleships are coming out of storage. Even some of the museum pieces are being refitted. Sophie nodded slowly. It was not enough. Against 47 Devourer warships, it would never be enough. But it was what they had. There's something else, Admiral Kevin said. We're receiving transmissions from non-human vessels. Freelance captains, mostly. Some Cathari merchants, a few Vorik scout ships. They want to know if they can join us. Sophie turned from her tactical display. Join us? Why? They say they're ashamed of their governments. They say they want to help. For a moment, Sophie felt something warm cut through the cold weight of command. Not everyone in the galaxy was content to watch and wait. Some still remembered what it meant to do the right thing. Tell them to fall in line, she said. Anyone willing to fight is welcome. On the other side of human space, something else was happening. Something that would later be called the greatest volunteer fleet in galactic history. Captain Eddie Ramos had been hauling cargo between mining stations when the news reached him. His ship, the Second Chance, was old and slow and held together with patches and prayers. It was not a warship by any definition, but it had cargo holds. Big ones. Eddie gathered his crew of 12 and explained the situation. The Devourer fleet was coming. 17 worlds were in danger. The Galactic Council was doing nothing. Can't fight, Eddie said. But we can carry. We can get people out. His engineer, a young woman named Rosa Delgado, looked at him with wide eyes. We're talking about flying into a war zone, I know. Could all die. I know that too. Rosa was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that showed teeth. Well, when you put it that way, let's go save some people. The Second Chance was not alone. Across human space, civilian captains were making the same choice. Cargo haulers dumped their freight to make room for passengers. Mining vessels stripped out their equipment and installed emergency life support. Even a luxury cruise liner, the Starlight Dream, emptied its cabins and set course for the endangered colonies. No one ordered them to do this. No government commanded their service. They simply heard that people needed help and decided to provide it. On Nexera Prime, the first world in the Devourer fleet's path, Governor Maria Santos had been organizing evacuations for 3 days. Her transports could carry maybe 200,000 people. Her population was 8 million. The math was simple and cruel. She stood in her office, watching the sky through the window when her communications officer burst through the door. Governor. Ships incoming. Human signatures. Maria felt her heart freeze. The military was not supposed to arrive for another 5 days. If they were here now, something had gone wrong. Then she saw what was coming through the atmosphere. Not warships, freighters, cargo haulers, mining vessels, transport ships. Dozens of them, then hundreds, filling the sky like a swarm of metal insects. Her communication console crackled to life. "This is Captain Eddie Ramos, of the cargo vessel Second Chance. We've got room for 8,000 passengers. Point us to whoever needs a ride." More voices followed, one after another, each announcing their ship and their capacity. "This is the Starlight Dream. We can take 50,000 if they don't mind sharing bunks. Mining vessel Lucky Strike here. We've converted our ore holds. Ready for 20,000? Freighter Maria's Hope reporting in. We can carry 15,000 plus supplies." Maria Santos sat down heavily in her chair, tears streaming down her face. She had been prepared to watch millions of her people die. She had been ready to stay behind with those who could not escape. Now salvation was falling from the sky. Why? She managed to ask through the open channel. "Why are you doing this?" Eddie Ramos's voice came back, calm and steady. "Because someone had to, Governor. Now let's get your people out of here." Evacuation began immediately. Human crews worked around the clock, loading passengers, distributing supplies, coordinating landing zones. They slept in shifts, ate standing up, and ignored every safety regulation that would slow them down. Cathari merchants, who had joined the fleet, helped coordinate traffic patterns. Vorik scouts provided sensor coverage for incoming threats. It was not much, but it was something. On the 5th day, the last civilian transport lifted off from Nexera Prime. 8 million people had been evacuated. Not a single life lost. Admiral Sophie Grant received the news on the bridge of the Resolute. Her fleet was still 3 days out, racing toward the coming battle. "The civilians did it," Kevin Park said, wonder in his voice. "They actually did it." Sophie nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the tactical display. The Devourer fleet was still coming. 16 more worlds remained in its path, and somewhere out there, hundreds of merchant ships were now flying toward danger, their holds full of refugees, and their crews exhausted but unbowed. "Get me a channel to the civilian fleet," Sophie said. Connection crackled open. Two. All civilian vessels currently operating in the evacuation zone. What you have done is nothing short of miraculous. But the enemy is still coming, and we need every ship we have. She paused, knowing what she was asking. "Anyone who wants to leave, leave now. No one will think less of you. But if you're willing to stay, if you're willing to keep helping until this is over, fall in behind the Resolute. We're going to need you." For a long moment, the channel was silent. Then Eddie Ramos's voice came through, rough with exhaustion, but steady as ever. "Admiral, the Second Chance isn't going anywhere. Point us at the next colony." One by one, the other civilian captains reported in. Not a single ship turned back. Sophie Grant smiled for the first time in days. "All ships," she said. "Prepare for battle." Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace like a nightmare-given form. 47 massive warships, each one larger than any vessel humanity had ever built. Their hulls were black and organic-looking, covered in spines and strange growths that seemed almost alive. They made no attempt at communication. They never did. Admiral Sophie Grant stood on the bridge of the Resolute, watching the enemy formation take shape on her tactical display. Red icons clustered together in perfect formation, moving with the coordination of a single mind. "All ships report ready," Commander Kevin Park announced. 900 vessels total. 400 military, 500 civilian support. Sophie nodded. 900 against 47. The numbers sounded good until you compared the actual firepower. Each Devourer's ship carried weapons capable of cracking a planet's crust. Their armor had withstood everything other species had thrown at them for centuries. "Any response to our hails?" Sophie asked, already knowing the answer. "Nothing, Admiral. They're ignoring us completely." Of course they were. The Devourers did not negotiate. They did not threaten or warn. They simply consumed. Sophie took a deep breath and opened a channel to the entire fleet. "This is Admiral Grant. I'm not going to lie to you about what we're facing. These ships have destroyed civilizations that existed before humanity learned to make fire. They have never been defeated in open battle." She paused, letting that sink in.
Damn.
"But they have never fought humans. They don't know that we don't give up. They don't know that we don't know how to surrender. They think this will be easy." Her voice hardened. Show them how wrong they are. All ships execute pattern Sigma 7. The human fleet scattered like a flock of startled birds. Ships broke into small groups of 3 or 4, spreading out in every direction. To any observer, it would look like chaos. Like panic, the Devourer fleet continued its steady advance, ignoring the dispersing gnats around them. They had seen this before. Primitive species often fled when faced with superior power. Then the first Devourer ship exploded. Human vessels had approached from multiple angles, staying just outside the enemy's weapons range until they were in position. When the signal came, they struck as one. Not with missiles or energy beams, but with something far more brutal: mining lasers. Industrial cutting tools designed to slice through asteroids and process or equipment that had never been intended for combat but was terrifyingly effective when aimed at enemy ships. Commander Ryan Peters led his strike team through the chaos. His destroyer, the Swift Justice, was small and fast, built for reconnaissance rather than direct combat. Today, it was playing a very different role. Enemy fighters launching. His sensor officer called out. Ryan saw them on his display. Hundreds of small craft spilling from the Devourer motherships, swarming toward the human fleet. They were fast, probably faster than anything humans had. "Ignore them," Ryan said. "Stay on target." His target was the lead Devourer's ship's engine section. Intelligence suggested that was their weak point, assuming they had any weak points at all. Ryan's job was to find out. The Swift Justice dove toward the massive enemy vessel, its hull groaning under the stress of the maneuver. Devourer fighters tried to intercept, but Ryan's pilot was better. She threaded through gaps in the enemy formation that should not have existed, trusting instincts honed by millions of years of human evolution. The mining laser fired. Once, twice, 3 times. Chunks of the Devourer ship's hull tore away. Something inside exploded, sending a shockwave that rocked the Swift Justice sideways. Direct hit on engine assembly. The sensor officer shouted, "They're losing power." Ryan allowed himself a fierce grin. All ships concentrate fire on disabled targets. Don't let them recover. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out. Human ships took insane risks, flying straight at enemies that outmassed them 1,000 to 1. They used tactics that no other species would consider, turning weaknesses into weapons. A cargo freighter, its hold still full of evacuated civilians, spotted a Devourer fighter heading toward a damaged medical ship. The freighter's captain, an elderly woman named Grace Chen, made a decision in half a second. She rammed the fighter. The impact destroyed both vessels. Grace Chen and her crew of 6 died instantly. But the medical ship survived. The 300 wounded soldiers inside would live to see another day. Stories like this repeated across the fleet. A mining vessel used its drilling equipment to bore directly into a Devourer ship's hull, sacrificing itself to destroy the enemy from within. A squadron of fighters formed a living shield around a damaged carrier. Buying time for its crew to repair critical systems, Admiral Sophie Grant watched her fleet die in pieces and continued, giving orders. There was no time for grief, no time for doubt. Only the next decision, and the next, and the next. Kevin Park's voice cut through the noise. "The civilian fleet is reporting heavy casualties. They're asking for permission to withdraw." Sophie closed her eyes for a moment. The civilian ships were never meant for combat. They had volunteered to help with evacuations, not to fight in a war. She had no right to ask them to stay. "Tell them permission granted," she said. "Anyone who wants to leave can leave with our thanks." The channel went silent for a moment. Then Eddie Ramos's voice came through, rough with exhaustion. "Admiral, this is the second chance. We've got 3,000 refugees still aboard. We can't leave until they're safe. Captain Ramos, you're in a war zone in an unarmed freighter. Get your people out. Negative, Admiral. If we run, those Devourer fighters will chase us down. Our only chance is to stay with the fleet. He was right. Sophie hated that he was right. Then stay close to the carrier group, she said. We'll cover you as best we can. Out. The battle raged for hours. Human ships fell, but for everyone that died, a Devourer vessel was damaged or destroyed. The enemy had expected easy prey. Instead, they found a species that fought like cornered animals, giving nothing freely and taking everything they could. By hour 12, the Devourer fleet had lost 18 ships. The humans had lost nearly 100, with dozens more crippled. But the tide was turning. Ryan Peters barely felt the explosion that tore through the Swift Justice's starboard side. Alarms screamed. Smoke filled the bridge. He could see stars through a hole in the hull that had not been there a moment ago. Ah! Damage report. He shouted over the noise. Hull breach on decks 4 through 6. We've lost starboard thrusters. Casualties unknown? Ryan grabbed his console as the ship lurched. Can we still move? Barely, Commander. We've got maybe 30% thrust. Through the viewport, Ryan could see the Devourer command ship. Their primary target? If they could disable that vessel, the enemy fleet might lose coordination. It could change everything. Then we keep going, Ryan said. All power to forward weapons. We're finishing this. The Swift Justice limped toward the enemy flagship, trailing fire and debris. Devourer fighters swarmed around them, scoring hit after hit. Ryan watched his crew die around him, one by one, kept giving orders. The final shot came from a mining laser that should have been empty. Ryan's weapons officer, a young man named Patrick Vega, had somehow coaxed one more burst from the overheated system. It struck the Devourer command ship's central core. The explosion was visible across the entire battlefield. Patrick slumped over his console, his burns too severe for any medical treatment. Ryan held his hand as he died. Did we get them? Patrick whispered. Ryan looked at the tactical display. The Devourer command ship was gone. The enemy fleet was scattering, losing the coordination that had made them so deadly. Yeah, Ryan said softly. We got them. Admiral Sophie Grant watched the enemy retreat and felt nothing but emptiness. They had won. Against all odds, against every prediction, the human fleet had broken the Devourer armada. But the cost. God, the cost. 23 ships destroyed. 40 more crippled beyond repair. Over 4,000 human lives lost, along with countless volunteers from other species who had joined their cause. Sophie opened a channel to the fleet. Her voice was steady, but barely. All ships, stand down from battle stations. The enemy is retreating. I repeat, the enemy is retreating. A ragged cheer went up across the surviving vessels. But Sophie did not join it. She was already thinking about the letters she would have to write, the families she would have to notify, the price of victory. The stars were quiet now, littered with debris and the fading heat of destroyed ships. Somewhere in that wreckage floated the bodies of heroes who would never come home. Sophie Grant sat down heavily in her command chair and allowed herself one moment of grief before the work began. Again, the news spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. In council chambers, in trading posts, in military bases, in private homes, beings of every species watched the reports with growing disbelief. The humans had won, not just survived, not just escaped. They had broken the Devourer fleet, destroying or crippling 31 of 47 enemy warships. The remaining 16 had retreated into deep space, their coordination shattered by the loss of their command vessel. High Arbiter Nexathon sat in his private chambers, watching the battle footage for the fourth time. His bioluminescent body pulsed with colors that his attendants had never seen before. Confusion, awe, fear. This is impossible, the Solvorian High Speaker said. He stood beside Nexathon, his bark-like skin shifting through shades of gray. The Devourers have never been defeated, not in 3,000 years of recorded history. And yet, Nexathon gestured at the display, where a human destroyer was ramming itself into a Devourer ship's engine core. There is the evidence. How? They are children. Their civilization is barely a moment old compared to ours. Nexathon was silent for a long moment. He had lived for 4 centuries, had seen empires rise and fall, watched countless species climb the ladder of civilization only to stumble and fade. He thought he understood the patterns of galactic history. Humans did not fit any pattern he knew. "Watch this recording," he said, pulling up a different file. "This is the cargo freighter Second Chance. An unarmed civilian vessel with 3,000 refugees aboard. Footage showed the battered freighter flying through a storm of enemy fire. Devourer fighters surrounded it, scoring hit after hit. The ship's hull was torn open in a dozen places. It should have been destroyed in the first minutes of the engagement. Instead, it kept moving. Its crew patched holes with emergency sealant and their own bodies. Its captain, a man named Eddie Ramos, continued giving orders even as his bridge collapsed around him. For 18 hours, that unarmed freighter survived in the heart of a battle that should have killed everyone aboard. When the fighting ended, the Second Chance landed on Nexira Prime with all 3,000 refugees still alive. Captain Ramos collapsed on the loading ramp and had to be carried to a medical facility. "I do not understand," the Solvorian High Speaker said. "Why would anyone do this? Risk everything for strangers?" Nexathon shook his ancient head. "That is what frightens me. We asked ourselves the same question and found no answer that justified the cost. The humans asked themselves and found no answer that justified inaction." On Nexira Prime, the mood was very different. The colony world had been saved. 8 million people who should have been dead were alive because humans had come to their rescue. Governor Maria Santos stood at the main spaceport, watching the first human warships land for emergency repairs. The vessels were barely recognizable. Their hulls were scorched and torn, covered in patches and emergency welds. They looked like they had flown through a star and somehow survived. Admiral Sophie Grant descended the landing ramp slowly. Her uniform was burned in several places. Her face was covered in soot and dried blood from a cut above her eye that no one had bothered to treat. She looked like she had not slept in days, which was probably true. Maria approached her with tears streaming down her face. She had prepared a speech, words of gratitude and praise that she had practiced a dozen times. When the moment came, all of it fled from her mind. "Thank you," was all she could manage. "Thank you." Sophie Grant shook her head slowly. "Don't thank me, Governor. Thank the civil eons who got here first. Thank the merchant captains who flew unarmed ships into a war zone. Thank the miners who strapped weapons to their hulls and called themselves a navy." She looked up at the sky, where the debris of the battle still glittered like distant stars. "We just did what needed to be done." Word of the human victory spread through every level of galactic society. Politicians debated its meaning. Military commanders studied the tactics with a mixture of admiration and horror. Ordinary citizens shared the stories of human heroism and asked uncomfortable questions about their own governments. Why had the Council refused to act? Why had species with fleets 10 times larger than humanity's chosen to debate while millions faced death? Why had it taken the youngest civilization in known space to do what everyone knew was right? The Cathari hegemony faced protests on a dozen worlds. Citizens demanded to know why their military had sat idle while humans bled and died. The hegemony's leadership scrambled to explain, but their excuses rang hollow. The Solvorian Republic was no better. Their High Speaker issued a statement, praising the human victory and carefully avoiding any mention of the Council's failure to respond. No one was fooled. Even the Vorix Collective, usually above such political concerns, found itself dealing with internal dissent. Young Vorix asked why their scout ships had only joined the battle after the humans committed. Elders struggled to answer, but it was a phrase that spread faster than any political movement. A warning passed between diplomats and military commanders. A reminder of what happened when humanity stopped asking for permission. When humans say, "Fine, I'll handle it," the galaxy shuts down. No one knew who said it first. Some claimed it originated in the Cathari court. Others traced it to a Solvorian military academy. It did not matter. The phrase captured something true, something that every species was beginning to understand. Humans were different. Not stronger. Not smarter. Not more advanced. Just different in a way that made them terrifying. They did not calculate the odds before acting. They did not weigh costs and benefits until the scales balanced. They saw a problem, decided it needed solving, threw themselves at it with complete commitment. Sometimes that made them foolish. Often it made them dangerous. Always it made them unpredictable. On the station that housed the Galactic Council, Ambassador Zethril of the Vorex Collective requested a private meeting with the human delegation. Lisa Monroe agreed. Was curious what the crystalline being wanted to discuss. They met in a small conference room overlooking the stars. Zethril's body pulsed with colors that Lisa had learned to read as nervous energy. "I wish to speak with you personally," Zethril said. "To express my shame at the Council's failure to act," Lisa nodded slowly. "Appreciated, but unnecessary. Your scout ships joined the fight. That's more than most did. A token gesture." Zethril's colors shifted to deep blue, the Vorex expression of regret. "We could have done more." "We should have done more. Then why didn't you?" The question hung in the air between them. Zethril was silent for a long moment, his crystal form flickering through a spectrum of emotions. "Because we were afraid," he finally admitted. "Not of the Devourers. Of the precedent? If we acted without council approval, what would stop others from doing the same? If we committed resources without compensation guarantees, would we be expected to do so again?" Lisa felt something cold settle in her chest. "So you let millions face death because of bureaucratic concerns?" "Yes." Zethril did not try to defend himself. "And you showed us how shameful that calculation truly was." He moved toward the window, his crystal body catching the starlight. "My government has authorized me to offer whatever assistance you require. Ships, resources, medical support. Name it, and it is yours." Lisa studied the alien ambassador for a long moment. She could have refused. Could have reminded him that his help was too late. Could have made him suffer for his species' cowardice. Instead, she thought about the soldiers still recovering from their wounds, the ships that needed repairs, the colonies that still needed evacuation assistance. "We'll take the help," she said. "But understand something, Ambassador. This isn't forgiveness. This is us doing what needs to be done, same as always." Zethril bowed his crystal head. "Understood. And perhaps in time, we can learn to do the same." He left the conference room, leaving Lisa alone with the stars. She stood there for a long while, thinking about everything that had happened. The Council's failure, the human response, the terrible cost of victory. Danny Ortega found her there an hour later. "The memorial service is scheduled for tomorrow," he said softly. "Admiral Grant wanted to know if you would speak." Lisa nodded without turning from the window. "I'll be there." "What are you going to say?" She thought about the 4,000 lives lost, the heroes who would never come home. The price of doing what was right when everyone else looked away. "The truth," she said finally. "That they died because no one else would act, and that their sacrifice saved millions." Donnie moved to stand beside her. Together, they watched the stars in silence, mourning the dead and wondering what would come next. The galaxy had been watching. Now it would have to decide what it had learned. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Nexira. The debris had been cleared. The wounded had healed, or at least learned to live with their scars. The dead had been buried with honors that no words could truly capture. Now, the Galactic Council was gathering for its annual summit, and everything had changed. Lisa Monroe walked through the corridors of the Council station with Danny Ortega at her side. Diplomats from 100 species moved around them, but the crowd parted as the humans approached. Eyes and sensors and stranger organs tracked their movement. Whispered conversations fell silent as they passed. 6 months ago, humans had been the youngest members of the Council, tolerated but not respected, included but not heard. Now, they were something else entirely. Lisa entered the great chamber and took her seat in the human section. The room was fuller than she had ever seen it. Every species was represented, every delegation at full strength. The air hummed with tension and anticipation. High Arbiter Nexathon rose from his central platform. His ancient body glowed with ceremonial colors, patterns that had not been used in centuries. "Before we begin our formal agenda," Nexathon announced, his voice carrying across the silent chamber, "the Council wishes to address the events of the past cycle." Turned toward the human delegation and performed a gesture that made several older diplomats gasp audibly. It was a bow of respect, the kind offered only two equals. "The Galactic Council formally recognizes the actions of humanity during the Devourer crisis. Your courage, your sacrifice, and your commitment to protecting innocent life have earned the gratitude of every civilized world." Lisa nodded politely, but said nothing. She had learned to wait. Nexathon continued. "We also wish to discuss the future. The Council proposes a new framework for mutual defense. Integration of human tactical doctrine into Council military planning. Partnership agreements that will ensure no civilization ever faces such a threat alone again." Lisa glanced at Danny, who raised an eyebrow slightly. They had expected this. Everyone wanted to be friends with the species that had broken the unbreakable enemy. The Cathari speaker rose. "The hegemony supports this proposal. We offer full access to our shipyards for human vessel construction and repair." The Silvorian High Speaker followed. "The Republic pledges 300 warships to a joint defense fleet under human command." One by one, delegations announced their offers. Ships, resources, technology, knowledge, everything. Humanity had been denied for 12 years was suddenly being placed on the table. Like a peace offering, Lisa listened to it all, her face carefully neutral. When the declarations finally ended, she stood. The chamber fell silent immediately. Every being present understood that this moment mattered. What the human ambassador said next would shape the future of galactic civilization. "We appreciate these offers," Lisa began, her voice calm and measured. "Truly, the resources and partnerships you're proposing will save lives and strengthen our collective security." She paused and her expression hardened slightly. "But I want to be clear about something. Humanity did not fight the Devourers because we wanted recognition. We did not save those colonies to prove ourselves to this council. We did it because 400 million lives were at stake, and no one else would act." The chamber was utterly still. Even the atmospheric system seemed to hold their breath. "For 12 years, we have been members of this council. In that time, we have watched crisis after crisis unfold while delegates argued over procedure and profit. We have seen worlds burn while committees debated response protocols. We have listened to speeches about galactic unity while billions suffered because no one could agree on who would pay the cost of helping them." Lisa's voice rose slightly, not in anger, but in intensity. "That ends now. If you want humanity as an ally, we will stand with you. We will fight beside you. We will die beside you if that is what it takes. But we will never again sit quietly, W. High innocent people are sacrificed on the altar of bureaucratic convenience." She looked around the chamber, meeting the gazes of beings who had dismissed humans as children just months before. "We do not ask for special treatment. We do not demand leadership. We simply expect that when lives are at stake, this council will act quickly, decisively, without waiting for perfect consensus or guaranteed compensation." Lisa sat back down. The silence stretched for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then High Arbiter Nexathon did something remarkable. He bowed again, even deeper than before. "Humanity's terms are accepted," he said. "All of them. This council commits itself to action over deliberation when lives hang in the balance." He turned to address the full chamber. "Let the record show that on this day, the Galactic Council adopted the doctrine of immediate response. When any member world faces existential threat, the full resources of this body will be mobilized within one standard rotation. No delays, no conditions, no excuses." The chamber erupted into noise. Some delegates protested. Others applauded. But the vote that followed was decisive. The resolution passed with the largest majority in council history. Later that evening, Lisa stood on the observation deck of the station. The stars drifted past the viewport, endless and eternal. Somewhere out there, the surviving Devourer ships were still running. Somewhere out there, colonies were rebuilding and refugees were returning home. Danny joined her with 2 cups of coffee, real coffee imported from Earth at ridiculous expense. Some luxuries were worth the cost. Think they'll actually change? Danny asked, handing her a cup. Lisa wrapped her hands around the warmth and considered the question. Some will, some won't. The Vorik seemed genuinely committed. The Cathari will probably backslide the moment it becomes inconvenient. So we accomplished nothing. No. Lisa shook her head slowly. We accomplished something important. We showed them what's possible. We proved that action matters more than discussion. And we made sure they'll remember what happens when they fail to act. Danny nodded, sipping his coffee. The 4 words. Exactly. Fine, I'll handle it. Lisa smiled, but there was no humor in it. Next time something like this happens, they'll remember. They'll remember the Devourers. They'll remember the cost. And maybe, just maybe, they'll decide to handle it themselves before we have to. A soft chime announced an incoming transmission. Danny checked his tablet and raised an eyebrow. It's Captain Ramos. He's asking if you have time for a call. Lisa's smile softened. Eddie Ramos had become something of a folk hero in the months since the battle. The cargo captain who had refused to run, who had kept 3,000 refugees alive through 18 hours of combat in an unarmed freighter. He had been offered commissions in a dozen navies and turned them all down, put them through. Eddie's weathered face appeared on a small display. He was sitting in what looked like the bridge of a ship, though not the Second Chance. That vessel was being repaired in an Earth orbital facility, a project that would take at least another year. Ambassador. Hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Nothing that can't wait. How are you, Eddie? Restless. Laughed, but there was something serious underneath it. They want to give me medals, you know? Ceremonies and speeches and all that official stuff. You deserve them, maybe. But that's not why I called. Eddie leaned forward, his eyes intense. I've been talking to some of the other civilian captains. The ones who ran the evacuations. We've been thinking about what comes next. Lisa set down her coffee. I'm listening. Council's got its new resolution, and that's good. But resolutions don't save people. Ships save people. Crews save people. And right now, there's no organization dedicated to doing what we did during the crisis. No fleet of volunteers ready to move when governments are too slow. He paused, gathering his thoughts. We want to change that. Build something permanent. A civilian rescue fleet that can respond to emergencies across the galaxy without waiting for political approval. We've got 30 captains signed up already. More joining every day. Lisa felt something warm bloom in her chest. This was exactly what the galaxy needed. Not more governments, not more councils, but ordinary people ready to help when help was needed. What do you need from us? Mostly just not getting in our way, Huddy grinned. Though if you could convince some of those alien governments to let us operate in their space, that would be helpful. I think that can be arranged. They talked for another hour, working out details and logistics. By the time the call ended, the first framework of the Galactic Rescue Corps was taking shape. Danny had been listening quietly. Now he spoke up. 6 months ago, we were the junior members of the council. Barely tolerated. Now we're reshaping galactic politics and launching civilian aid organizations. Lisa nodded. Watching the stars drift past. That's what happens when you actually do something instead of just talking about it. She finished her coffee and set the empty cup aside. Come on, we've got more work to do. They left the observation deck together, walking toward whatever challenges came next. Behind them, the stars continued their eternal dance. Witnesses to a galaxy that was slowly, painfully learning what it meant to be human. To act when action was needed. To help when help was required. To say those 4 simple words and mean them? Fine, I'll handle it. And then, to actually do it.